His new neighbor looked exactly like him, but claimed to be the original. The chipped mug of instant coffee did little to dispel the fog of exhaustion clinging to me. Daniel Hayes, 34 years old, a software engineer whose life revolved around lines of code and the comforting hum of servers. Moving into apartment 5B at the Hawthorne Residences had promised a fresh start, a clean slate after a particularly messy breakup and the soul-crushing monotony of my previous living situation. The building itself was a study in beige anonymity, a concrete block attempting a veneer of modern sophistication. Nothing about it hinted at the bizarre disruption that was about to shatter my carefully constructed normalcy. It started subtly, a fleeting glimpse in the hallway mirror that made me do a double take. A man, walking in the opposite direction, with my build, my slightly stooped posture, the same unruly shock of dark hair that always seemed to defy my attempts at taming. I blinked, attributing it to fatigue, the late nights spent wrestling with debugging code. It was just a trick of the light, a stranger with a passing resemblance. The next encounter was more unsettling. I was unlocking my apartment door when I heard a voice behind me, a voice that was undeniably mine, albeit slightly muffled. "Keys," it said, a statement, not a question. I turned to see him, leaning against the opposite wall, a mirror image staring back at me. Same height, same tired lines around the eyes, the same faint scar above the left eyebrow I'd earned during a childhood tree-climbing escapade. He even wore the same faded blue t-shirt and perpetually wrinkled jeans I'd thrown on that morning. He pushed himself off the wall, a ghost of my own movements. He held up a set of keys, identical to mine. "Apartment 5A, he stated, a flat, matter-of-fact tone. "I moved in yesterday." My mind struggled to process the visual information. It was like staring into a mirror, but the mirror was breathing, moving independently. A wave of dizziness washed over me, a primal sense of wrongness. This wasn't just a resemblance, it was a carbon copy. He offered a curt nod, a gesture I recognized as my own when I wanted to end an awkward interaction. Then, he unlocked the door to 5A and disappeared inside. The rest of the day was a blur of disbelief and mounting anxiety. How could this be? A doppelganger, a twin I never knew existed. The logistics seemed impossible. My parents were only children. There had never been any mention of another sibling. I spent hours poring over old family photos, searching for any hint of another child, another branch of the family tree. Nothing. The images confirmed my solitary childhood. The following days brought more unsettling encounters. We would pass in the hallway, our movements echoing each other with an eerie synchronicity. He would be doing laundry at the same time as me, our hands reaching for the same detergent. He would be getting mail when I was, our names identical on separate envelopes. His presence was a constant, unnerving reminder of myself, a shadow self inhabiting the apartment next door. I started avoiding the common areas, ordering groceries online, working from home even more than usual. The comfortable anonymity I had sought in the Hawthorne Residences had been replaced by a suffocating sense of being watched, of being mirrored. One evening, as I was microwaving dinner, a sudden thought struck me. His keys. He had said, keys, as if I should have known something. And then, his claim. I moved in yesterday. It hadn't sounded like a new resident introducing himself. It had sounded like a statement of fact, a correction. A cold dread seeped into my bones. What if he wasn't just someone who looked like me? What if his claim to be the original held some terrifying truth? The thought was absurd, irrational. But the visual evidence was undeniable. He was me. I started observing him more closely, surreptitiously. His habits, his mannerisms. They were all mine. The way he chewed his lip when concentrating, the nervous habit of tapping his fingers on any available surface, the slight tilt of his head when listening. It was like watching a recording of myself. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside his door, a strange compulsion drawing me there. I could hear the faint sound of typing, the familiar rhythm of someone coding. It could have been me, working late. I raised my hand to knock, 1,000 questions swirling in my mind. But then, a wave of fear washed over me. What if he answered? What would I say? What if his original claim held a sinister implication? I retreated, the unanswered questions hanging heavy in the air. Have you ever had a moment where you saw someone who looked eerily like you? What was your reaction? Did you ever find out who they were? Sleep offered no escape. My dreams became fragmented, filled with distorted reflections and echoing voices. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the unsettling image of my doppelganger burned into my mind. The line between reality and paranoia began to blur. Was I going crazy? Was this some elaborate hallucination? But the encounters were too consistent, too tangible. Other residents had seen him too, offering vague descriptions of that other quiet guy who looks like Daniel. Their casual acceptance of his existence only amplified my unease. How could they not see the impossibility of it all? Days turned into weeks, and the presence of my double became an oppressive weight. I felt like my identity was being eroded, my sense of self undermined by his very existence. Who was the original? The question gnawed at me relentlessly. One Saturday, driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to confront him. I waited until I saw him leave his apartment, heading towards the laundry room. "Hey," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He turned, his expression impassive, a mirror of my own apprehension. "We need to talk," I continued, trying to sound more assertive than I felt. He simply nodded, a gesture that felt both familiar and alien. We stood in the sterile hallway, the silence punctuated by the distant whir of the washing machines. "Who are you?" I finally asked, the question hanging in the air. His gaze was steady, unnervingly so. "I told you, I'm the original." His words, delivered with such calm conviction, sent a fresh wave of unease through me. "What does that mean?" I pressed, my heart pounding. He tilted his head slightly, that familiar gesture of contemplation. "It means you're the copy." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. His words, so simple, so direct, carried a weight of unimaginable implications. "That's impossible," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. He offered a small, almost sad smile, a mirror of my own rare moments of melancholy. "Is it?" He didn't elaborate, simply turned and continued towards the laundry room, leaving me standing in the hallway, the implications of his words crashing down around me. The copy, the echo, the imitation. The thought was horrifying, a fundamental assault on my sense of self. My memories, my experiences, my very being, were they just derivations of his? I retreated back to my apartment, the sterile walls suddenly feeling claustrophobic. I looked in the mirror, my own reflection now seeming unfamiliar, tainted by the possibility of being a mere imitation. I had to know the truth. I had to understand what was happening. If you suddenly encountered someone who claimed to be the original you, how would you react? What would be the first questions you would ask? Driven by a desperate need for answers, I started digging into the history of the Hawthorne Residences. I spent hours online, searching for any mention of unusual events, strange occurrences. The building seemed unremarkable, a typical modern apartment complex. But then, I stumbled upon an old article, a local news piece from years ago. It detailed the controversial construction of the Hawthorne Residences on the site of a former research facility, a facility that had reportedly been involved in some kind of advanced, and highly secretive, scientific research. The article was vague, the details sparse, but it mentioned rumors of experimental technologies and unexplained disappearances. A shiver ran down my spine. Could there be a connection? Could whatever research had been conducted at that facility have somehow led to this? The thought was outlandish, bordering on science fiction. But in the face of the impossible reality of my doppelganger, outlandish seemed increasingly plausible. I tried to find more information about the research facility, but the trail went cold. The company that had operated it had long since dissolved, its records seemingly vanished. My focus shifted to my neighbor, my double. I started trying to learn more about him, subtly observing his routines, his interactions with the other residents. He was as solitary as I was, keeping to himself, avoiding prolonged conversations. No one seemed to know anything about his past, his life before moving into 5A. One evening, I saw him receive a package. It was small, nondescript, with no return address. When he opened it inside his apartment, I saw a faint, unusual light emanating from his window, a soft, pulsating glow that lasted only a few moments. My curiosity, and my fear, intensified. What was he hiding? What was the source of his unsettling existence? I knew I had to find out more, to uncover the truth behind his claim, even if it meant confronting the impossible. I started having vivid dreams again, but these were different. They weren't my usual chaotic narratives. These were fragmented images, flashes of sterile white rooms, humming machinery, and figures in lab coats. There were glimpses of two identical figures lying side by side on metal tables, a sense of coldness and clinical observation permeating the scenes. The dreams felt like memories, but not my own. They felt manufactured. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. What if his claim was true? What if we were both created, products of some forgotten experiment conducted beneath the very building we now inhabited? The thought was terrifying, stripping away the foundation of my identity, reducing my life to a mere fabrication. I had to find proof. I had to know where we came from. If you suspected that your existence was the result of a scientific experiment, what would be your first course of action? Who would you trust? My investigation became more desperate, more reckless. I started trying to find a way into his apartment, driven by an overwhelming need to uncover his secrets, to find any clue that might explain our shared existence. One afternoon, I noticed he had left his window slightly ajar. An opportunity, however risky. Under the cover of darkness, I carefully climbed onto the narrow ledge separating our balconies. The drop was significant, a mistake potentially fatal, but my desperation outweighed my fear. I managed to pry his window open further and slipped inside. His apartment was eerily similar to mine, a mirror image in layout and furnishings, yet subtly different in its details. The books on his shelves were the same titles, but arranged in a different order. The artwork on the walls were the same prints, but hung in different locations. It was like stepping into a slightly distorted version of my own life. I searched frantically, my heart pounding in my chest. Drawers, closets, under the bed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, I found it. Tucked away in a locked metal box in his closet, a file. Inside, there were documents, scientific reports, and photographs. The photographs were of us. Two identical infants, lying in incubators. Two identical young boys, playing in a sterile room. Two identical teenagers, undergoing a series of medical examinations. The reports detailed a project, codenamed Gemini, involving advanced cloning technology. The objective: the creation of genetically identical human beings for purposes that were heavily redacted. My blood ran cold. His claim, I'm the original. The documents seemed to confirm it. One subject, designated Subject Alpha, born slightly earlier. The other, Subject Beta. Me. I was the copy. The realization was devastating, a profound violation of my sense of self. My life, my memories, my very existence felt like a derivative, a shadow of someone else's original blueprint. As I stood there, reeling from the revelation, I heard the sound of the front door opening. He was home. Panic surged through me. I had to get out, to escape this mirrored existence, this manufactured reality. I scrambled towards the balcony, the documents clutched in my hand. He appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He saw the open window, the metal box, the file in my hand. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something akin to resignation. "So," he said, his voice flat. "You know." I didn't answer, my mind still struggling to comprehend the enormity of what I had discovered. "What now?" he asked, his gaze steady. I looked at him, at my own face staring back at me, no longer with confusion, but with a dawning sense of shared, manufactured existence. "I don't know," I admitted, the words heavy with the weight of the stolen truth. The silence stretched between us, two identical beings grappling with the shattering of their perceived reality. If you discovered that you were a clone, a copy of someone else, how would it change your perception of your life and your identity? What would you want to do next? The immediate aftermath of my discovery was a strange mix of shock and a perverse sense of clarity. The unsettling feeling of being watched, of being mirrored, finally had a horrifying explanation. He wasn't just someone who looked like me, he was the template, the original upon which my existence had been based. We didn't speak much that night. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air between us, a shared burden of a manufactured past. He didn't express anger at my intrusion, perhaps understanding the desperation that had driven me. Perhaps he had always known this day would come. In the following days, a fragile truce formed between us. We were two identical entities, adrift in a world that had created us for reasons unknown. The animosity that had simmered beneath my unease began to dissipate, replaced by a hesitant understanding, a shared sense of being out of place. We started talking, tentatively at first, sharing fragments of our lives, our memories. It was surreal, listening to my own experiences recounted by someone who looked exactly like me, yet held a slightly different perspective, a subtle variation in the narrative. His memories predated mine, filled with experiences I had never lived, yet somehow felt a connection to, like half-forgotten dreams. We pieced together fragments of the Gemini project from the documents I had found. It seemed the intention wasn't just replication, but something more complex, something involving the study of consciousness, the potential for transferring memories or skills. The redacted sections hinted at ethical concerns, the project ultimately shut down, the subjects disposed of. That last implication hung over us, a silent threat. Were we anomalies, loose ends that were meant to be tied up? Was our continued existence a mistake? We realized we were alone in this. The world outside, the oblivious residents of the Hawthorne Residences, would never understand. To them, we were just two quiet neighbors who happened to look alike. A decision began to form, unspoken at first, but growing stronger with each shared glance, each hesitant conversation. We couldn't stay here, living a lie, haunted by a past we didn't fully understand and a future that felt precarious. We had to find out more. We had to uncover the truth behind the Gemini project, to understand why we were created and what our purpose was supposed to be. And perhaps, in doing so, we could forge our own purpose, define our own existence, separate from the shadow of our shared origin. The shimmering door in my living room, the manifestation of my subconscious, took on a new significance. It had appeared before I knew the truth, a bizarre anomaly in my otherwise mundane life. Now, it felt like a sign, a potential pathway to somewhere else, somewhere where we could perhaps find answers, or at least a chance to build a life free from the ghosts of our creation. We stood before the door, two identical figures silhouetted against its otherworldly light. Fear and a fragile hope mingled in the air between us. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a mirror of my own apprehension. I nodded, a silent agreement to face whatever lay beyond, together. He reached out, his hand a perfect reflection of mine, and together, we stepped into the shimmering light, leaving behind the sterile anonymity of the Hawthorne Residences and the unsettling truth of our shared beginning, venturing into the unknown in search of our own original future. If you were faced with a mysterious, otherworldly door, with no idea what lay beyond, would you step through it? What would you hope to find on the other side? If you found this story intriguing and want to know what lies beyond the shimmering door, please like this story, share it with others who enjoy a good mystery, and subscribe for more tales that delve into the strange and unusual. Your support helps us explore more captivating narratives.